Thanks, guys. You're doing great. Yeah. Well, good morning. I can see that a few of you are, as I knock down my pencil, I see a few of you have been around long enough to remember Art Linkletter, and Kids Say the Darndest Things. He was a television personality, and part of his shtick was to interview kids about stuff. So, let's find the insight of children. The Sunday school teacher asks, "Johnny, tell me, do you pray before eating?" Johnny replies, "No, ma'am, I don't have to. My mom is a good cook." Sunday school class was being quizzed on the Ten Commandments. They were ready to discuss the last one. The teacher asked if anybody could tell her what it was. Susie stood up and said, "Thou shalt not take the covers off your neighbor's wife." A boy was watching his father, a minister, write a sermon. And he asked, "How do you know what to say?" And his father said, "Well, God tells me." And the boy looked at him puzzled, saying, "Why do you keep crossing things out?" After the christening of a baby brother in church, little Johnny sat in the back seat of the car on the way home and he started to cry. His father asked him, "What's wrong?" Johnny said, "The priest said he wants us to be brought up in a good Christian home, and I want to stay with you guys." A little boy was overhead praying, "Lord, if you can't make me better, don't worry about it. I'm having a really good time." So, happy Easter, everybody. Easter is, of course, the most celebrated of holidays in the Christian tradition. And, of course, I could probably do 52 Sunday lessons on all the aspects of the Passion Play. Of course, there's the thumbnail of the story, for those of you who aren't aware. A fellow named Jesus of Nazareth came to Jerusalem during the Passover festival. Big festival, everybody comes to Jerusalem. The country's under Roman occupation. Jesus, of course, wants a big audience. Of course, that's the assumption at least. Stirs up a little trouble at the temple, and Romans don't particularly like that. Arrests him, tortures him, executes him. And then Jesus resurrects from his tomb, hangs around for a while, and then ascends to heaven. That's the thumbnail sketch. Of course, it's a lot more complex than that. But over the next 100 years, a lot of the writers were trying to figure out what happened. Jesus was a rabbi. He was Jewish. And the Jews had been praying for some time, and it was this expectation that the Messiah was going to come and was going to kick the Romans out of Israel. It was a Roman occupation with heavy taxation and just an authoritarian state. And about 50 years later, in the year 70, there was a Jewish revolt against the Romans because they just got tired of waiting for the Messiah. And at that point, there were some people that tried to pin the death of Jesus on the Jews to try to appease the Romans, because it was a Roman execution. So we've got these fragments of a tradition that was created in that first 100 years, after Jesus lived. And one of the things that people came up with was, the Jews always did these animal sacrifices. And part of the animal sacrifice was to take a lamb that was perfect, no blemishes and stuff like that, and sacrifice it for the Passover dinner. And the fact that this happened during Passover week, that's it. Jesus was a slaughtered lamb. He died for our sins, and yet he resurrected. So, of course, I was driving and saw that, there was a church up on Dale Mabry had a big sign said, "He is risen," and that's the whole thing. So much of the Christian tradition really looks at, why did Jesus die? If he was the Messiah, how come the Romans were able to crush him so easily? But, for unity and other New Thought denominations, we look at, why did Christ live? Why did Jesus come here? Why did Jesus live? What was he trying to teach us? Because we believe that we're all spiritual beings having a human experience, just like Jesus was. And Jesus was trying to teach us to turn to that divine within us and understand who we really are and live the life that he was living, to affirm the things that he was affirming. Unity's approach to spirituality recognizes that all of the narrative stories in the Bible have embedded symbolism in them. And that's what makes this relevant right now in 2019. It's okay. You can read this stuff literally, and if you get spiritual nourishment or solace from it, that's great. I find though that when I look at the symbolism, it really brings things alive and makes it much more positive, practical, and progressive to our current day and the things that are going on. So this is not just a story about Jesus, because Jesus is a symbol of that Christ consciousness, that awareness that we are a spiritual being having a human experience, and that we're connected to something much larger than ourselves. This thing that we know as God, the spiritual entity that is everywhere, including within us, every cell of our body. So this is this three-act play that we're looking at: crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. Stay to the end of the play. Don't leave after the resurrection, the ascension. And let's dig into that a little bit more here. This is symbolic of something that happens within us: crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. And it doesn't just happen once. It happens over and over and over again, like we heard in the daily word reading today. So let's take a look at the resurrection. In the Gospel of Matthew, the 27th chapter, starting with the 66th verse, this is right after Jesus has been crucified and they're about to bury him. And there's the Jewish leaders come to Pilate, and they're talking about their concern that they might steal the body out of the tomb. So Pilate says, okay, you have a guard of soldiers, go make it as secure as you can. So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the tomb with a stone and setting a guard. Now, as I mentioned, Jesus represents spiritual awareness. Now, have you ever had a time in your life where you believed strongly in something and then you recognized, I was wrong? And that reconciliation process we go within, sometimes it takes just grieving that we've lost that attitude or that assumption that we had about the way the life should be. And the symbolism here is that each of us at some point in our life has to crucify something that we recognize isn't working for us anymore, or can't work for us anymore. I mean, maybe there's a death involved or whatever. And suddenly we're in that place where, we're going to have some grief. But there's this tradition of when something dies, burying it. The planter's tradition of planting a seed and seeing it grow. It's like, okay, this belief system may be dead for me, but something better can come from it if I am willing to put it back into the womb of the earth. Notre Dame, our Mother Earth. And then see what happens afterwards. Now, it's interesting because modern engineers say that a stone that could seal off a tomb or a cave opening probably would weigh about 8,000 pounds. So it's not something that people could easily move. But let's go back to the Gospel of Matthew now in the 28th chapter, starting with the first verse. After the Sabbath on Saturday, toward the dawn of Sunday, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat upon it. His appearance was like lightning. His clothing was white as snow, and for fear of him the guards trembled and became like dead men. That's to part here a little bit. Every woman named Mary in the Bible represents some aspect of love, expressing our love. And Mary, and of course all male characters represent thinking nature, all female represent emotional or feeling nature. It's a stereotype, but that's the symbolism that we've got from these books from 2,000 years ago. So, realize that the love comes to that old place, still trying to look at, is there something we can do about the fact that our old belief system or assumptions are dead? And suddenly there's an earthquake. And isn't it interesting that sometimes at the worst times in our life, there's an earthquake on top of it? It's like, oh, geez, God's piling on. But the earthquake rolls away the stone and starts to reveal something new. So let's jump to the description of the Gospel of John, 20th chapter, first verse. We've got these four Gospels, each of them were written for a certain constituency. And John is very much into the symbolism. Gospel of John, 20th chapter, first verse. Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been rolled away from the tomb. She ran and went to Simon Peter, the other disciple, I'm sorry, Simon Peter. Okay, let's try that again. Simon Peter, right there, that'll preach, yeah. Went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, which is John, and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." And I've had that experience too. I remember in 1986, when I was going through this divorce, and I was, feeling suicidal, and like all of my assumptions, all of my comfort zones were suddenly erased. And it's like, they've taken away my basic assumptions, and I don't know where to turn and what to do. And if I could just find those old basic assumptions again or resurrect them, everything will be fine. But what I was to discover is that there was no way I could resurrect my old assumptions. There was no way I could resurrect my old attitudes, and boy, I'm glad I didn't. Because by changing my attitude and moving, something better happened. And with me, I was lucky enough that within a few weeks, God introduced me to a woman named Carla Golden. And suddenly things started to fall into place, that I had a much better future ahead of me than I had had before that. Gospel of John, 20th chapter, 11th verse. Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she looked into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "Because they've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they've laid him." Saying this, she turned around and saw someone standing there, but she did not recognize it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom do you seek?" Supposing him to be the gardener, Mary said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Still searching for the old way. And it's so easy for us to fall into that old way until we recognize that everything happens for a reason. So she still wants to fix it. She still wants to grasp the old ways. But the angels are saying, "Hey, snap out of it." And they're at the head and the feet, the understanding and the will nature of the human body. And she doesn't even recognize that there's something better standing in front of her. But then suddenly, Jesus says to her, "Mary." She suddenly realized and turned to him and said in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hug me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, and to my God and to your God." Why did Jesus not want her to hug him? Well, if we consider that this is the symbolism of the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension, we've dropped the old way of thinking, but suddenly we realize, hey, we can move on, so we're resurrected. But we haven't yet ascended. We haven't really grasped the new, higher, better way of doing things. And if Mary represents love, and she's in grief and a bit frazzled at the moment, but Christ consciousness is basically saying, I can't go back there. Yeah, I've got feelings here, but I can't go back there. I can't embrace that anymore. So just allow me to ascend to that new level, and then you'll understand how we're going to move forward. So, are you ready to let go of what doesn't work anymore? After all that time fretting, after all that time worrying, after all that time of angst, we emerge from the fog and like, oh, it can be so much better. Why was I clinging to the old way? I'm going to have Duncan put up this week's takeaways. Like I said, the thing to remember about Easter is crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. So take the whole cycle. Watch the whole play. Are there any beliefs or attachments that I need to crucify? And when we crucify something, yeah, it can be scary, it can be painful, but deep down we know it's the best thing for us. Am I willing to let go of the old ways? Am I willing to roll away the stone? It seems impossible, it seems hopeless, but it's a yes, I'm willing to roll away the stone, whatever it takes. Am I willing to resurrect and keep going? Keep moving forward, one step after another. And then number 5, am I willing to ascend to a new belief? Those are your takeaways for this week. I have a video I want to show you about some people who thought they had a very comfortable and adequate life until things began to happen.
Generally speaking, if you're a kid growing up in Pittsburgh, like Jesse and Josh Lyle, the last place you ever want to be is in a courtroom across the table from Detective Jack Rook. Rook is a by-the-book, no-nonsense, chew-em-up, spit-em-out, 22-year veteran of the force. Outside of work, he's a committed bachelor, a man's man, who would never so much as let a Vidalia see his soft side. For fun, he hits people, and volunteers at the Steel City Boxing Gym, teaching the sport to underprivileged kids.
Most of the kids that come in this gym are street kids. I'm not going to hurt you. Many of them have been born in the poverty.
Kids like Jesse and his older brother Josh. Long before their date in court, Jack had been working with them.
Turn that hand!
He really liked these kids and knew the feeling was mutual.
Turn that hand.
So when they just stopped showing up at the gym one day, Jack went out and found them.
And he was asking me about it, and I just cried.
What Jack didn't know, what no one knew till that moment, was just how bad these kids had it. They were in a foster home with foster parents who Jack says were extremely abusive and neglectful.
They've had it as worse as any other kid that's ever lived in the city of Pittsburgh, living conditions-wise. And that just, I had enough of it.
So Jack Rook took matters into his own hands, cashed in some favors, and got the kids placed in a new home.
Even someone else to eat.
His. For Jack, it's been quite an adjustment.
I'm over here trying to learn my culinary skills from it.
But I get the sense that you really love this.
Yeah, yes. It's awesome. It's the best thing I ever did in my life.
At least it was the best thing. Until the day he went to court and did one better.
He'll be successful.
Adopted the boys.
Come on, guys.
And made them Rooks.
You're Rook, right? You happy?
After this story first aired in 2014, we got a lot of email. A surprising amount from women who wanted to meet this guy. So did you email us? Are you one of those?
No.
Mary says she saw the story, but she met him in a bar. Did you go to the bar because you knew he'd be there?
Yes.
Yeah.
They were married last summer. She came with 3 of her own, so now Jack and the boys are part of a Brady Bunch. A family none of them could have ever imagined just a few years ago. Jack especially.
I thought being single was fun, because you don't have no responsibilities. But when you're single, you don't realize what you're missing. I'm glad I let her break through that barrier and take me away from that life.
Sounds like it wasn't just the boys who were rescued. Steve Hartman, on the road, in Pittsburgh.
Closing Bible verse. Gospel of John, 20th chapter, 17th verse. Jesus said to her, "Do not hug me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, to my God and to your God. And may you always be open to God's guidance and grace." Let's prepare for meditation.
Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true.